Journey through the pages of fear. The city was a desolate wasteland of concrete and steel, a place where hope went to die. And in the heart of this urban jungle lived a man who knew loneliness all too well. He spent his days trapped in a mundane job at an accounting firm, crunching numbers and dreaming of an escape. But it was in the pages of his beloved crime novels that he found solace, losing himself in the shadowy worlds of murderers and thieves. Yet, as the days wore on, the lines between reality and fiction began to blur, and he found himself haunted by the very horrors he once loved to read about. The man knew he needed help. The characters and crimes from the novels he had devoured for years had begun to seep into his daily life, and he could no longer distinguish between what was real and what was fiction. Seeking psychiatric help, he found himself in a cold, sterile office, facing a doctor whose eyes were like two bottomless pits. The doctor's voice was soft, yet full of menace, and the man felt a creeping dread spreading through him like a virus. As he spoke of his obsessions, the man could feel the doctor's presence growing more and more palpable, until it seemed he was no longer alone in the room. In that moment, he knew that his descent into madness had only just begun. The psychiatrist prescribed the man a cocktail of medications to help treat his psychosis. At first, the man was hesitant to take them, fearing that they would rob him of the escape he so desperately craved. But as the days wore on, he began to feel a new clarity. The world around him seemed more and more real than ever before, and the crimes that had once consumed him now seemed like distant memories. He even found himself venturing out of his dingy apartment, wandering around the dark streets of the city, feeling more alive than he had in years. But the drugs had a dark side, and as the man delved deeper into his newfound reality, he began to notice something strange. Everywhere he went, he felt like he was being watched. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and the city's inhabitants took on a sinister quality. The man's dreams were plagued by twisted visions of murder and mayhem, and he could feel something clawing at the edges of his sanity. It was as though the veil between his world and something darker had been lifted, and the horrors he had once only read about were now creeping into his life. The man knew that he was in too deep, but he couldn't turn back now. The pills had opened a door that could never close, and he was a slave to the nightmares that waited on the other side. One night, the man took a walk to clear his mind, the city's dark alleys and dimly lit corners calling to him like a siren song. As he walked, he came upon a shadowy figure selling books on the sidewalk. The man couldn't resist the lure of the written word and began to peruse the selection. Amongst the stacks, he found a crime thriller that caught his eye. It was old, the cover worn and frayed, but there was something about it that called to him. The bookseller issued a vague warning, cautioning him that the book was not for the faint of heart. But the man shrugged off the warning, thinking it was just the bookseller trying to make a sale. As he handed over his money, the man couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, as if he had just made a deal with the devil. That night, the man sat down to read his new purchase. As he read, he began to feel something stirring inside of him, something dark and malevolent. The crimes he had once loved to read about were no longer distant fantasies. They were alive and real, pulsing with a sinister energy. The man tried to put the book down, to distance himself from the horrors that lay within, but it was too late. The lines between reality and fiction had blurred once again, and the man found himself caught in a twisted game of life and death. The man tried to stop reading the book, but he found that he couldn't. The acts of violence and murder described within its pages had taken a hold of him, haunting his dreams and creeping into his waking hours. He knew he was losing his grip on reality when, a day later, he began to notice the characters from the book appearing in real life. The murderers and thieves he had once read about were now walking the same streets as him, their cold eyes locking on to his like predators on the hunt. The man went into his psychiatrist's office, frantic and terrified, desperate for a solution. But when he checked his prescription, everything appeared to be in order. The man knew he needed something more radical, a treatment that would finally release him from the grip of that book and the psychosis, and so the doctor suggested a new kind of therapy, one that involved confronting his deepest fears head on. The man was hesitant at first, but as the therapy progressed, he began to feel a sense of release. The book no longer had a hold on him, and the characters from its pages faded into distant memories. The man knew he would never be the same again, that the horrors he had faced would be with him forever, but for the first time in his life, he felt truly alive, a survivor in a world that had once held him captive. The man decided to take a break from reading for a while and went to the movies, hoping to escape into a world that was not his own. The movie began harmlessly enough, but as it progressed, he began to notice something strange. The characters on the screen seemed to be looking at him, their eyes boring into his with an intensity that made him feel like he was being watched. The man tried to shake off the feeling, to tell himself that it was just his imagination, but he knew deep down that something was not right. And then, as if on cue, the world around him began to warp and twist, the movie screen flickering and fading away to reveal a new reality. The man realized with a growing sense of horror that the movie was not just a movie, that it was something more real than he had ever imagined. The characters from the screen had stepped out of their world and into his, their cold hands reaching out to claim him as their own. As the darkness closed in around him, the man knew that he was trapped once again in a nightmare from which there might be no escape. The line between reality and fiction had been irrevocably blurred, and he was caught in its deadly grip forever.